Hi there, I'm Heather, and this is my husband, Dr. Ron Llewellyn.
Welcome to Life Together.
A place where we share,
Laugh,
and try to provide helpful information on things like marriage,
relationships, mental health issues.
We've been married for 18 years.
We have 2 cats, no kids.
Yeah, so take any parenting advice with caution.
You know, in 18 years, we've been through a lot. We've learned a ton.
And we just want to share those lessons with you. So we hope you enjoy. Hi,
Hey everybody.
Heather and Ron. Heather and Ron here again. You might notice it looks a little different here. We haven't moved.
We haven't.
No, it was our anniversary. Well, it's our anniversary today, we think. And so we went away for the weekend. We're just staying at the Zermatt Resort in Midway. We're heading home soon. It's been a good weekend, and yeah, anyway, happy anniversary to us.
Happy anniversary.
All right, 18 years.
18
Long time, yeah.
years.
Long years, but yeah, it's a good weekend, so. Right,
Yeah.
Go ahead, what were you going to talk about today?
Well, actually, it was interesting. I saw the list that Heather had at our house. We have a chalkboard. And on her list, she had a bunch of different things to bring. And she had a note to me that said, bring some sexy things.
Oh my gosh.
And so I brought...
Geez. That's super inappropriate. You can't show that on the internet.
I can't too. This is David, Michelangelo's David by Underwear. Now, that is sexy. So I might toss some on for you later. No? Alright, well anyways. Well, since we're just joking around, I figured maybe we should talk a serious topic for a little bit.
Okay.
And one of the areas of expertise that I have is post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative identity disorder.
Closer.
And I don't want you closer.
Sorry.
I'm kidding. And so I wanted to start this series, and this series is probably going to be several videos long because we're going to try to keep things shorter, and we're going to cover stuff pretty heavily in each episode and try to have fun with it at the same time as we're discussing a serious topic. So, as a layperson, what do you think? Yeah, what do you think?
So I'm here to help, like, regular people understand what we're talking about, because Ron's going to use a bunch of big technical terms, and so I'll try to help bring this to like regular people level.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you had to take a guess just from pop culture, which I think it's probably going to be pretty close, what would you say post-traumatic stress disorder is?
Well, it seems like something that happens to people after an incredibly stressful or traumatic event. So it'll happen a lot with veterans of war.
Sure.
Anyone who's really experienced serious trauma, like maybe a rape or a violent encounter. And so they start showing all of these different symptoms. And they can, we'll get into that, right? But
yeah, we're going to do a full episode.
It affects their lives going on. So
it does. If you had to take a guess of how many people experience these traumatic episodes, of the people who experience traumatic episodes, what percentage do you think develop post-traumatic stress disorder?
I'm going to guess it's a lot.
You think?
I could be wrong. I have no idea. Like 80%.
80%?
Yeah.
That's a pretty good guess. Which is way off,
Oh.
actually. Epidemiology is a study of how things occur within society. And so, because they're very large studies, it takes a long time to do these studies. And we have data from 1995. We have some updates since then. But still, in general, in the United States, between, it ranges based upon area and location, but between 7 and 15% is a safe estimate, typically around 12%
Okay.
of people
I guess
who
that's
experience. It is good.
Yeah.
It is, and there's a lot of reasons why someone who may experience a traumatic event won't go on to develop the symptoms, and those are called resiliency factors, which we'll probably talk about later. And it's not the people who develop PTSD are not resilient. That's far from the truth. But yeah, that's approximately the statistic. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so A couple other things we're going to just jump into real quickly before we start doing the symptoms, which this is going to be kind of a dry episode because we're just going to talk about the symptoms very briefly as they're written. But there are other conditions that tend to be comorbid or tend to exist alongside of PTSD.
Okay.
Can you guess some of the other mental health issues that tend to exist alongside of post-traumatic stress disorder?
Maybe like addictions.
Addiction.
Okay. Hold on, I'm thinking. Any kind of like anxiety issues, right?
She's
Depression.
really good.
I'm pretty smart.
So depression, addiction, anxiety are the top ones, absolutely. More chronic forms of trauma, sometimes there's a comorbidity with borderline personality disorder, which we're going to spend some time on because there's some controversy with that. And that should be fun, because I always, when I talk about this, I always get people in an uproar when I talk about borderline personality disorder. So that should be fun. But anyways, why don't we jump into the symptoms per se.
Okay.
And it's going to be really dry, like I said, because we're just going to go into the symptoms as they're written in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, published by the American Psychiatric Association. I think it was 2013 is the newest update, which we could go on and on about that book. I have some problems with it, but I appreciate all the effort people put into creating it. I understand also that it's necessary. But now, let me do a disclaimer. The reason why I'm giving the DSM criteria as they are in the book, because you can find it online anywhere. So all you do is have to search DSM-5 PTSD and it pops right up in front of your face. So Heather actually did a really good job. One of the main things, and actually one of the only psychological conditions that's dependent upon another outside source, is PTSD. There has to be some form of a perceived or actual outside source of trauma. And that trauma, that trauma basically says, not the trauma says, but the book says, exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or the more following ways. Either a direct experience, it was very personal, you witnessed it, you learned of events that happened to close friends or family, or it's been a repeated extreme exposure to aversive details. That's interesting. That's actually something I believe that came around after September 11th,
How so?
2001.
Wait, I don't understand what that one means, really.
Oh, it means chronically being exposed to very difficult information, like all the news that happened after 9/11.
I see.
And people started to develop PTSD from just constantly consuming this terrifying stuff and this horrific stuff. And I really do think, and I'm not 100% certain on that, but I do think that came around after September 11th. Okay, now that's number one. Number two is presence of one or more intrusive symptoms. By the way, I'm sick. I think I've been sick for every recording with the exception of the introduction.
Yeah, you have been sick a lot. I'm getting a little tired of it.
Yeah, so am I. And we're going to do an episode on the man cold. The scientific proof of the man cold or the man flu. Yeah. Anyways, what is an intrusive symptom? This is, I mean, when you think about this, it's pretty much the crux of what a lot of people think about PTSD. It's intrusive, distressing memories of the event. It's also recurring distressing nightmares related to the trauma. Now notice there's caveats here. Intrusive, distressing memories. So in other words, they cannot be controlled. Recurrent, distressing nightmares related to the trauma. And then there are dissociative reactions such as flashbacks. We're going to go into a full series on flashbacks because these are quite fascinating and very difficult for people to cope flashback is where a person feels realistically as if they are back in the event, or there's another flashback like an emotional or a body flashback.
And are those usually, and you said we'll get into this, but it seems, at least from what you see on the movies and things, that those are like triggered by like a sound or a smell. I mean, is that the case with a lot of these symptoms? Like there's some sort of cue that triggers these?
Yeah, the vast majority of the symptoms are triggered by some cues, and oftentimes it's unnoticed. They're so subtle, and sometimes they're very obvious actually, but they can be very, very subtle, and I'll give plenty of examples in the next episode on this. Then there's intense distress at exposure to cues. Heather just predicted the next one.
I did.
There you go. And then there's marked physical reaction. Notice it says physical reaction to internal clues or cues. So we have the intense distress, which would be the emotional, and then we have the physical reaction to the cues.
So that would be like sweating or shaking, or maybe you like get physically ill? Is that kind of what you're talking about? Okay.
Absolutely. So, do you want to cover the next one, number 3?
Sure. So criteria 3 is one or more persistent avoidance symptoms. Symptoms.
Those are those big words she was talking
They
about.
are. Persistent avoidance symptoms. So avoidance or effort to avoid those memories or thoughts and feelings. So you're trying to, you don't want to think about them, right?
Yeah.
An avoidance or effort to avoid external reminders.
That goes back to the previous two we talked about. So when a reminder is basically a cue. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to avoid those.
Yeah, if you had a traumatic event at, your school, and you avoid at all costs going back to that classroom where that happened, something like that.
Exactly. Now, a little bonus question.
Okay.
Should I quiz her, or should I just I don't know if she'll get this right.
Just quiz me. We'll see.
I'm
I'm
quiz
smarter
her.
than you think.
What? Oh, I know that. Well, I guess then that means I think that you're smart. Anyways, what's the difference between a sign and a symptom? She was just all blustery.
I thought I was really smart. I don't know. I couldn't even try to explain it.
A sign is physically observable.
Oh, okay.
A symptom is reportable, but it's pretty difficult to see from another
Interesting.
person. Yeah. Side note, it doesn't really matter unless you're in the field. And I'm assuming maybe one day some people will start watching this. They're in the field.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day. Okay. Now this is a new addition to the DSM criteria for PTSD. And it has to do with 2 or more negative changes in cognitions and mood associated with the trauma. Real quick layout. Before the DSM-5 came out, there was a lot of research showing that there's different forms of PTSD. And there was some backlash because of that due to legal and political issues, which we might talk about in a future episode as to why they didn't want to acknowledge a more chronic, complex form. But yeah, anyways, they've introduced some of those symptoms that were recognized before the publication of this book, in this book. Okay.
All right.
So the inability to remember things associated to the trauma itself that cannot be attributed to chemicals, cannot be attributed to a traumatic brain injury, or anything else that could cause an amnesia. If that's all ruled out and we still have a gap in memory related to the trauma, that's dissociative amnesia.
Okay.
That's one. And then there's persistent and exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations of me as the person who's been traumatized, of others, and the world in general.
So how would that manifest? Like, I'm trying to think of an example, and I don't know that I understand.
How about if I'd say we're going to go into it extensively in the next episode?
Next.
So,
on the next
I encourage
episode.
you to watch the next episode. Isn't that Dr. Dre?
Yeah. That was the first thing that
Shout out
popped
to
into
you,
my
Dr. Dre. Okay, then persistent distorted cognitions about the consequences that will ultimately lead to self-blame. You always hear about survivor guilt, the blame. We're going to talk extensively about that, about some stuff that's not recognized. Well, I don't know if it's recognized, it's not really written about. but it's been definitely something clinicians have recognized for some time. And then there's a persistent negative emotional state.
Why are you pointing at me? I'm not negative persistently.
You're not negative persistent? Okay.
No.
Moody persistently?
Sometimes.
Okay.
So not persistently.
Not persistently.
No.
Oh, okay.
Mm-mm.
My mistake. Okay. And then there's markedly diminished interest or participation in significant activities. Sounds a lot like depression, doesn't it?
Right.
Feeling detached from others. It's going to be very interesting. I'm going to offer a biological explanation to that.
And for me, when I hear that, it makes me think of they don't understand. Like they can't relate to me.
Yeah, that's what it's meaning.
Okay. Like they didn't go through that. How can we relate anymore?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's meaning. But there's also a biological function behind it, which we'll cover in the next episode. Or maybe, because I think we're going to break this down pretty thoroughly, that it might be a couple episodes out. So, anyways, and then there's persistent inability to feel positive emotions.
We've spent too much time together
Yes,
the
we
last
have.
3 days, so we're ready for a break.
Okay, so moving right along, because we don't want to make this video too long. 2 or more. Actually, would you mind doing number 5?
Sure.
I feel my voice is weakening a little bit.
It's weakening.
Oh.
That man cold. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so 2 or more marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with trauma. So, why are you laughing?
Nothing.
Irritable behavior and outbursts. I'm gonna have an outburst. Right?
I'm kidding.
Punch you in the throat. Reckless or self-destructive behavior. Hypervigilance. So when I'm listing these, this is exactly, when I think of PTSD, this is sort of the things that come to my mind.
Yeah.
Right. Exaggerated startle, problems with concentration, and sleep disturbance. Let me just say that as far as I know, I don't have PTSD, so I'm not like your example here. He's being a jerk.
I am being a jerk. Her symptoms are the motivation behind her issues. Totally different. Yes, issues are totally different than what we'd expect in PTSD. Yeah.
And then I'll read number 6.
Okay.
If you'd like me to.
Yes.
So more than 1 month. This is
these-
something that goes on for a while, right?
Yeah. So it has to exist for about 1 month, or not about, it has to exist at least 1 month. All these symptoms and signs. And that's because a lot of times people will experience these symptoms after a traumatic event, but then that resiliency starts kicking in, you start to see a reduction in the symptom. And after a month, they're doing pretty well. But there's another diagnosis called acute stress disorder that is there between the time of the trauma to 30 days.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and so that's pretty much the summary of the symptoms of PTSD. Kind of boring, I know, but we're going to get into some really interesting things in the upcoming episodes where I start describing and giving you real-life examples of this, the motivation behind the symptom, and in fact, we just covered this. I'm going to give you a sneak peek into the upcoming episodes. What if I were to tell you that every single one of these symptoms was an adaptive coping strategy? A healthy
What
coping
does that
strategy.
mean?
It means, we cope with stressors every day.
So this
These
is
are all
this
coping
is a way
strategies.
of people just coping with the trauma.
And to give a little preview of that, not today, but in the next episode, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Freudian concept of coping strategies, or what was termed, and still is, defense mechanisms. But with that said, why don't we sign off?
Okay.
And thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
If you could please pray for me so I don't...
Oh, this. No. Pray for me, because I can't take this baby anymore.
Give me a kiss.
Ugh. No, but seriously, if you guys like what you see, what you hear, subscribe to our channel, tell your friends about it, check out our Facebook and Instagram pages. Yeah, help us out. We're just, we're hoping that we can share good information for people, and yeah, if you find it helpful, then other people will, so spread the word.
Please, spread the word.
Yeah. All right.
And not the disease.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, thanks everybody.